So my girlfriend told me last night that she wants me to tie her up. Nothing crazy, she's pretty sub, but I am a goodish Christian who has never had sex before, so I really have no clue what I'm doing, and this applies in general to all sex stuff, but specifically to this. I'd like to be able to do it well. Any tips on how to learn, specifically with non pornographic resources? And caveat, she's actually never done this before either. She's just fantasized a lot.
There's a ton here in this one, you know? I mean, there's a lot going on. I will say, I still do consider BDSM to be advanced sex. And if you haven't done the basics, you need to think twice before you start doing stuff that's advanced. The potential for things going wrong is too high when you haven't really mastered the basics. And so I would caution this person to consider backing off from this plan, no matter how arousing it is. Now, I assume they've done something, oral, something, which is fine. You know, otherwise, tying up is pretty far outside. As a first sexual activity, that'd be a little bit over the edge. However, tying up comes with a significant number of safety risks. It's actually pretty advanced, even relative to other BDSM play. The notion of rope, knots can compress, knots can collapse if you haven't tied them correctly. And so when she tugs on the rope, the knot can get tighter and tighter and cut off it. So you use specific knots in order to do that. You tie the rope in a specific way. And so there's quite a lot of learning that's required to tie someone up, especially with rope. Now, cuffs make that easier. The cuffs, they can't tighten. They're only so tight, et cetera, et cetera. A little bit to learn. You need to be able to slip a couple of fingers through so they can't be so tight that they're already cutting off circulation, but less to learn there, I would say. So maybe a better place to start with cuffs than with rope. Certainly, one of the big complaints people have about 50 Shades of Grey is the use of silk ties as a bondage material because they're slippery unless you've really used like a Somerville bowline as a knot to make sure it doesn't collapse or compress. The opportunity for that knot to slip is pretty high. But with all that said, I think that the bigger issue here is they've fantasized about it, they found it hot, and yet they have not maybe laid all the groundwork to actually participate in that fantasy. He does raise an interesting question is, how can he learn? Let's say he's willing to take 3 months to learn about this, and he wants to learn about it, but does not want to expose himself to pornography for various reasons. I think even in the comments, some people referred to this. I do strongly recommend a website called theduchy.com, Duchy. He specifically is non-pornographic in most of the films, or he warns if there's any pornographic areas before you click. And most of the bondage videos, he's using like a super lifelike Japanese sex doll or something, wrapped all in white with no visible genitalia or anything. So the opportunity to learn the tying without the pornography, that's one of the few sites I would and he does an excellent job. Lazarus Redmayne, I believe is his name. And so that's one opportunity, but it's an interesting notion is, if you want to learn anything now, like you want to learn how to spank your partner safely, well, how are you going to do that with no pornography? And again, I think we turn to books. So the new topping book, the new bottoming book, Screw the Roses, Send Me the Thorns, there's relatively little porn in those books. It's more Jay Wiseman's SM101. These books, especially older books, minimal porn. So that's an opportunity to engage.
Yeah, I think all of that is really good stuff. I think the stuff about cuffs versus rope is a really good starting point, to maintain safety. Again, always interesting when we go over these questions about what aspect of the question foregrounds for you and what foregrounds for me, because I had a totally different line of...
I think I know I think I knew what was going to hit you, and so I took the other side somewhat deliberately. It's not that it didn't strike me, but...
Well, I'll tell you what struck me, and then you can see if you,
Pun intended?
came across the same... came across the same sort of thing, which is, we've actually answered a bunch of questions before from people who are religious or Christian and they're interested in Kink, or I think there was one that we even talked about how there was a person who was in a Catholic school, and they used to get spanked when they were like bad, and now when they're adults they're into spanking, but they're having sort of Catholic school trauma. They're trying to process the two things. My first advice to somebody if they just like came up to the street or something and started talking about this is to really because this is going to come up, right? To really critically ask themselves the question, both of them, because they both seem to be really intrigued by the idea of tying her up, is why is that so exciting, right? Because when you start pulling on that thread, inevitably, as we have found from answering a bunch of these questions, you will find that it starts hitting up against some of the religious upbringings or ideas that you are walking around with and operating in the world, right? And you will find very quickly that you're going to have to try to reconcile those two things, right? It's not like you can go to someone in church, right, and ask them advice, right? Which is typically a lot of the
well,
times.
apparently people coming up to you on the street, what you're saying, I don't know. Maybe they can.
It's a burden. It's a real burden I have to bear. But a lot of the times, if they're going through struggles, and they would ask a church member, like, how would you navigate something like this, right? So they're going to have to, if they're proceeding with this, I mean, even as individuals, separate from each other or together as a couple, if they find that this is highly exciting, they need to be able to kind of come up with a way where it reconciles with their religious beliefs, right? Because the common problem is that it keeps coming up, right, as a conflict. It doesn't have to be in conflict with religious beliefs at all. It could be, in fact, an expression of love that is perfectly in consonant, with religious beliefs. So one of the first things to understand is that it's great you're exploring this journey as, religious people, as Christians, pursue it for sure. You will, like many other people who are religious and start pursuing this, run into conflict, and you need to be able to be aware of that dilemma when it arrives, and not have to choose one or the other. That you can synthesize both in sort of one form. That they're not really mutually separated from each other. And the other thing is that like you said, it is somewhat difficult to learn how to do any of this stuff unless you are exposing yourself to eroticizing kind of material. Right?
Sure.
I mean, it doesn't have to be pornography, but even erotica, right? Especially if you're trying to get into the mindset of a submissive or a dominant, all of the erotica is really all archetypes, and it's, very exaggerated kind of play acting of archetypes. And so it can get really smutty really fast, and that could be uncomfortable for somebody who considers themselves, a Christian, and like, oh, what am I doing? I'm reading all this smut, shame on me. It's challenging. It's not impossible, right? But the fact that in the short question he answered, he's like, it can't be pornographic. I need to learn how to do this, but there can't be in porn, which is fine. I mean, that's nothing wrong with that. But if you also think erotica is porn, which many people would also consider porn, it will be extra challenging, a slightly more difficult.
That's very difficult. Getting a completely dry description of how to engage in sexual bondage is going to be, it's a little bit of a tough ask, I would say. Although, again, some of the books I've talked about come pretty close. The SM 101 is pretty straightforward. The New Topping book, I think, was slightly more erotic. New Bottoming book. Screw the Roses, Send Me the Thorns is an old favorite of mine. And it's more erotic. I mean, it's erotic because the topic's erotic, but it's not handled in a smutty way, right? The intention is to teach, not to titillate. And so it is titillating because it's erotic material, but the intention of the books in many cases is to teach. And so, yeah, once again, I think books is probably a good option there if you're really trying to avoid. Although I got the impression actually you'd be okay with smut, but I could be wrong about that. I think that's fair. We don't really know that in the question.
Yeah.
One
thing I'd also say is that if this couple is interested in using bondage, and this is the specific question that he asked, what I would also encourage is like there's very likely a very good chance that you're also interested in a whole bunch of other tangential kind of BDSM things. So also explore like how does she feel about a spanking, right? And you could spank somebody and be quite gentle. I mean, it's I kind of think it's intuitive, like it's obvious to know that you're going too hard. Maybe I'm being overly generous. I mean, maybe some people are not. It's not intuitive to some people that they have no idea how hard they're hitting somebody. I kind of think it's obvious, but that's me. But I mean, it could be
No,
spanking.
actually,
It could be dirty talk, right? And for a religious
sure.
person, how are they going to process talking really dirty, right? Because
Yeah.
that's a key part of labeling your partner a slut, right? Are you as a Christian okay with that, right? And we've talked a lot about what a slut means, and the mindset you're inhabiting when you're calling your partner a slut. Again, which is why for me I highlighted that you are going to start running into conflicts, right? A smut is going to be difficult for you to digest if you are really concerned about the Christian ethic. Talking dirty is, how do you feel about that, right? As a Christian, right? Calling your wife or cherished girlfriend, partner in life, a slut or a whore, right? It can be very jarring for sort of those sort of Christian sensibilities. I actually have I made a friend recently who is actually a pretty devout Christian, right? And he's married. He recently got married. And I hang out with him. He's just the nicest person, right? He's just such a good soul. You could tell, it just radiates goodness, right? And I'm like, I can never, in my wildest dreams, imagine him calling his, equally sweet and wonderful wife, right, a slut, right? They're just like the archetypical, wonderful Christian, loving, couple. And it again, I mean, maybe they do. They have a
Yeah,
dungeon
you
in their
never know.
house for all you know, right? But
Sure, totally.
it's such a leap, right? That I'm not sensing like, oh, these are people who have integrated a shadow, and because maybe they don't have like a really dark shadow to integrate, right? Or their shadow world or shadow play is at a different dimension or something. But that is something I run into when we have these conversations with or
I
about
will say, I
Christianity
will.
and
I agree. I will say one of the interesting things that's good about this couple in some sense is that he is engaging with it. I actually met a couple recently where I really got the perception that the wife was really into it and wanted to be called a slut, and the husband was kind of a bit clueless and like super nice and like, very,
right.
very, again, cool guy and all that, but had no idea. And I only recognize it because I recognize it, right? Like
Right.
I've seen
Right.
it so often.
Yeah.
Um, and so, wife is equally sweet and whatever, and they're both quite religious, but it was just interesting. And I couldn't, of course, say anything, but it was just interesting to note that it seemed, and of course, inevitably, I'm projecting to some degree. If you're not having a direct conversation, you're guessing, but it seemed fairly clear to me that she didn't know how to get him out of it. Now, here in this couple, he's engaging and he wants
Yeah.
to, and he's at least curious, and that's awesome, and I think that's great. Sorry, another friend of mine was dating someone, and he commented, "Oh well, she was raised pretty Catholic," and my immediate response, just off the cuff, I was like, "Well, the sex is going to be great at least, right?" Um, and the reason I think I said that is that one of the opportunities of a more religious or conservative upbringing is that it pushes more things into the shadow, and so you actually have almost a greater potential for kinky enjoyment in
Right.
private because you have a larger private space. And so, and all of that space can be eroticized. And
It's a
so,
great point. Great point.
yeah, yeah. And so the opportunity there is they could have a really amazing private sex life,
Yeah.
if they can navigate getting there. And I think he's being careful. I think that's good. Being obviously, well, and actually, to your point about how hard to spank, one of the things that makes it more intuitive is that you're doing it for your partner's reaction. And so you're hyper aware of her reaction, and you're not doing it just because you're wanting to be rough and you're focused on your own, you're exclusively focused on your own enjoyment of spanking her. So being able to tune in, and that comes naturally from love. If you have any form of love towards your partner and care for her enjoyment, care for her well-being, I mean, I find it difficult to be kinky on a one night stand. I think that's part of the reason I don't do that very much, or haven't historically, is it just, you can't get there. You don't have enough trust. You don't have enough foundation. So it becomes a bit empty for me. But even if you were to try and do such a thing, you could at least have some genuine wish for the well-being of the partner and the enjoyment of the experience, and that at least could let you tune in. With that said, I think with a new partner, I very intentionally, the first time I'm spanking someone, don't push it to 100% of what I think even they can take. I push to 50%. That's the experience. And then I'm like, hey, afterwards, I'm like, hey, how was that? It felt like that was about 50% of what you could do. How do you think that estimate is? And if the person's like, oh, no, I think that's like 90% of what it can handle. Okay, it's good to know I misjudged, and it's good to know I didn't push further. If, on the other hand, they were like, oh, I thought I was like 10%, I don't know. Well, okay, that's good to know too. And like you can push a little more the next time. So having the ability to play that out over time, as this couple does because they're engaged in a relationship, is a great opportunity. He doesn't have to strap her down to immobility the first time. He could just put some cuffs on and hook it to the headboard, leave her legs free, or vice versa, and that could be their first experience. It could be, hey, how was that? How did it feel? Did it live up to expectations? Was there anything you liked or didn't like? There's the opportunity to check in, reevaluate, and then escalate slowly over time. So that would be my other bit of advice.